Hello, today is Friday, August 7th. Welcome to episode 619 of Fault Lines, the National Security Institute's podcast that this summer gets you quickly up to speed once a week on the national security and foreign policy debate shaking up America. I'm NSI Advisory Board member Lester Munson. I'm joined today by NSI Senior Fellow John Lipsey and our special guest, the former Deputy Secretary of State of Panama, Carlos Ruiz-Hernandez. Carlos is a friend, and he is also the former ambassador to the United Nations for Panama. He is affiliated with the Center for Strategic and International Studies and the Inter-American Dialogue as a intellectual and foreign policy commentator. He is also a consultant in the business world and does a lot of work, obviously, on Latin America, Panama, and many of the issues that we're going to discuss here shortly. Folks, we're doing a deep dive each week on Fault Lines for the next few weeks as kind of a special summer series. Today, we're going to talk about Latin America and the Donroe Doctrine. The Donroe Doctrine is Donald Trump's version of the Monroe Doctrine. It's a new U.S. engagement with the region that we really haven't seen in a long time from either party, from presidents of either party. Of course, President Trump facilitated a change in government in Venezuela very significantly. We have also seen political changes across the region in Colombia, in Ecuador. There's an election coming up in Brazil. Of course, President Trump has discussed the Panama Canal extensively. There's issues of migration. There's issues of counter-narcotics, some controversies, some real achievements for the U.S., some real questions about U.S. policy. Carlos, I want to kind of give you a kind of open field to run in here. You've seen a lot. You've seen several American administrations at work. What's your overall assessment of the Donroe Doctrine and where, is the U.S. being more successful in the Western Hemisphere region than it has been in the past?
Yes. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me and reading all those very nice lines. I mean, they sound more. It's a lot of work, but it's not as decorous and nice. But thank you so much for that great intro. I think to talk about the Trump policy in Latin America and the Donroe Doctrine and everything, the best way to look at it is the way I reminded myself of when I was working in those rooms was that this is just a hegemon reminding itself that it is a hegemon. And I think that is what guided my policy work. It is basically if you do not go back to those theories, and it sounds a little more academic, Latin America since the 1820s up until 1899, we lived in this Westphalian sort of like world in which power was shared among equals and that sort of order. And I think after the Cold War ended, the U.S. sort of like entered in this process of you can call it strategic absentism to say something, and then eventually, the international relations order, the international system abhors absentees and vacuums, right? So I think that's what then China came in, the Communist Party of China fill in that vacuum in the form of ports, and we should definitely address ports. Grids, 5G, and loans, and a number of things. And I think then the Trump administration, different than any other U.S. administration, has decided that it is time to wake up. It is this hegemon is this, we're going back to this hierarchy of order of hierarchy rather than this Westphalian sort of like among equals, right? So I think the only serious question in this scenario that you could ask yourself is whether rebuilding that hierarchy, is the U.S. rebuilding that hierarchy on the cheap, meaning by just coercion, or is it going to do it to build to last, like, through legitimacy, working partners, bringing investment, respecting institutions, or at some occasions, like reshaping those institutions to serve the system that to serve some sort of hierarchy that serves American national security and stability in the region.
Carlos, that makes a lot of sense to me. There's, of course, a long history of the U.S. throwing its weight around in the region. This has not always been welcomed by our fellow nation states in the region, in the hemisphere. Has that changed at all? Are we seeing a different reaction from Latin American countries? I think about the election in Colombia, where a leftist was thrown out, very much a conservative president coming in. How much of that is a reaction to Trump policy? How much of that is really, just local politics inside Colombia and that kind of thing? In other words, how do you see this playing out with Latin American countries? Is it positive? Is it negative? Is it setting the U.S. up for more success or more headaches?
I think if you're in Latin America, I think it's very easy to always blame the United States and American foreign policy for all the problems. And I think that in the case of Panama, in the case of my work, I was always be reminded, or try to remind my colleagues and myself, that at some point, our great ally, or that hegemon, or that big brother, you know, they can have their own problems domestically, which is exactly what's happening today, right? American politics is going through its own, some people call it a revolution or whatever. So I think it's very easy to just blame the issues that were going in international relations on the United States. You mentioned Colombia. I think what has happened in fact, actually tomorrow is the inauguration of the new president in Colombia. I think what has happened in that election and what's happening in Colombia, it has to do more with the manner which Gustavo Petro, the outgoing president, handled his affairs for 5 years, rather than Trump being in the White House. I mean, certainly, Mr. Trump, it's his style to claim, that he has to do with everything surrounding him and surrounding the region. That's just his style. I mean, if you look at what happened in Argentina, to the extent that, it was Trump. Trump wasn't even the president when President Milei got elected. So Trump wasn't president when President Molino in Panama got elected. Whether it's positive or negative, you still have to wait. It's impossible to answer those questions. I do believe that there is in Latin America, a return, that pendulum coming back to some conservative right wing. You can call it right wing. It's very different in Latin America to just, say the right or the left. But it is there. It is very. You can see that there is a swing back to a more conservative style of politics. I think vis-a-vis Trump, I think Trump welcomes what's going on in Colombia. I think Trump welcomes what happened in Panama. I think Trump welcomes what it looks as what happened in Chile recently. I think they welcome it, and the reason that they welcome that in terms of foreign policy, thinking about Secretary Rubio, for example, it's because it means, or it may mean, the probability is higher that Latin American governments are going to push back on that other hegemon that it's been trying to infiltrate and do business through ports and electrical grids and telecommunications and foster instability in terms of migration and a number of other things, which I've actually personally witnessed myself. So I think whether it's positive or negative, time will tell. With these things in foreign policy, I remember Professor Hal Brands, here in DC. He told me grand strategy is hard, and it takes some time. So you gotta sit tight when this big changes are happening. And I think Latin America is a great test case, and the U.S. Secretary Rubio and the entire apparatus, they're going to do better for American national interests that focus in the Western Hemisphere.
Carlos, let me ask you about Rubio himself. He's a very good Spanish speaker. He's got roots in the region. His parents having been Cuban and coming to the United States as immigrants. His work, John and I saw up close and personal on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee was deep and broad. He covered a lot of issues: Asia, China, Latin America. As Secretary of State, he clearly seems to be playing a pretty critical role in the administration and Latin America policy. Do you think he brings maybe this is too much of a softball question, but do you think he brings a credibility on Western Hemisphere issues that is necessary for the kind of things President Trump wants to do?
Yes, of course. On one side is it's because of his heritage, because he's from Florida, and because of the connection of Miami and the connection of Florida politics to the entire spectrum of Latin American politics, obviously. But I think more important than that, what I would say that he brings insight. It's because he's on foreign policy, and I think, and you know this better. You and John know this better than I do. He is a realist. He leans towards that sort of hawkish realism, John Mearsheimer sort of theory of the case. And I think that that's what it's my personal view, and people can disagree. And I think that that's what Latin America policy, foreign policy, what American foreign policy in Latin America should look like, at least for the time being. Not in every field, not in every industry, not in every corner, not in every country, but predominantly because of the instability that our own domestic politics in Latin America have created in terms of hindering democracy. And you gotta think. My mind is going through transnational crime. My mind is going through the role of organized crime in migration, in international migration, and what happened in Venezuela during the Maduro years. That type of organized threats require a more of a realistic, I don't want to say hawkish because that's kind of controversial, but a more realistic, more of a philosophical, conservative way to look at foreign policy. And I think Secretary Rubio brings that. It's not just because he's a Latino heritage; it's more because of the way he looks at the case. And I think that that's what he has created. And it's always good to have someone that looks like you and speaks like your language to do these kind of things, which is why, a lot of foreign policy experts, when the Middle East was, that's a joke tells itself. The Middle East is still very much at the center stage, but a lot of colleagues of mine in the Middle East have told me, like, it's always great to have an American diplomat that can be, versed in our language and our culture and our customs. And obviously Rubio brings that to the region.
Fantastic. John, I don't know if you want to jump in with something.
Yeah, Carlos, you talked a bit about sort of these two forces. There's sort of what's happening, pretty widespread across the region, the domestic political dynamics, and kind of this pendulum swing to one degree or another. But it clearly seems present. And then you've got sort of the force of nature that is President Trump and what they're trying to accomplish. And I was hoping you could maybe color in that picture a little more. So help us, help folks get a stronger sense of, we're seeing, like, from afar, right? We're seeing elections swing a certain way. We're seeing, the prominent kind of case studies of El Salvador and Argentina, sort of the law and order crime, transnational crime, narcotics stuff on the El Salvador side. That's the story there. And then on the economic front, and sort of salvaging, or trying to salvage Argentina's economy with more conservative economics. IMF economics, but in Argentina, and you have those sort of two models. I'm interested both in, to get a little more fidelity on what is happening in the region. Why are we seeing what appears to be a pretty consistent pendulum swing, a wave of sorts
Yeah.
to the right, and then how influential are those two kind of test beds with Argentina and El Salvador on that, creating that political momentum or not? And then what is Trump adding to the mix?
Yeah.
As he's come in this second term.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very complex, compounded question, but I think I'll start by saying I think it was Professor Brzezinski who said once that there is in the world right now there's this global political awakening, right? And nowhere else, in my personal opinion, in the world, like maybe the Middle East, and there's some case to be made about Asia, but nowhere else in the world except in Latin America you can see that political awakening, because not just elites, it's entire societies and populations are getting awakened and woke. There's this forces, and it has to do all of it with social media, and it has to do with the fact that everybody gets information like in a split of a second, and everybody has opinions on every single issue. And what I'm trying to say here is, in the case of Latin America, so to understand the right and the left, and this whole idea of the socialist communist left against this capitalist good, sort of like value oriented Catholic right? So what's happening is the elites of, you need to understand a little bit with Latin America itself. Latin America historically has been ran by 40 to 50 families all across the board. It's just, that's a well-studied, it's empirical, it's out there. There's 50 families across the region have forever, for the longest time, control all the resources, the governments, and then recycle the law firms, and you name it, right? So because of this global political awakening, right, and in a sense, that's why it's so prompt to, the word populism, it's thrown in there, right? Because of that awakening, corruption is more visible these days in terms of exposing corruption, and people just react to that viscerally. And these elites, historically, have been associated with the Christian Democrats and that center right movements at some point. Therefore, so because of that, at some point, Latin America went left. In the last 15 years, I think, in 15 years ago and 10 years ago, it was like, that pink tide in Latin America. And it was a reaction to anti-establishment, anti-elite, anti all that stuff, right? Today, because you already saw those leftist governments rule for a period of time, and those movements and those let's call it leftist governments, didn't solve the problem. And if anything, because of this woke liberal movement that was very popular during the Obama years, for example, the combination of that soft power entering the social life, and in Latin America, and governments not delivering, governments on the left not delivering solutions, then the natural thing happened. Now we're going back. The pendulum is just going back to the right. It is just.
And is that principally like not solving the things people need? Is that principally issues around like crime,
yes,
crime and public safety, public security, and then economies that are just not growing, or in many cases going quite the wrong direction?
I think I would put in Latin America, and this is something that, because I'm from Panama, and Panama is one of, if not the safest country in Latin America, I've always struggled to understand how much security means to Latin Americans, and that's my shortcoming. But I would put security there as top priority for Latin America. That's why Bukele is the most popular leader, not just in Latin America, but if you put him across, globally, he's right up there, because Latin Americans care about security, and leftist governments not providing security for the average citizen was one of the big ones. And that's why That's why the strong man conversation becomes so popular, and Trump does appeal to that. That's what he's after. That he reveres people that bring that kind of security. In a sense, think about Nixon and this whole peace through strength kind of thing. So that's why Trump is so popular. People, oftentimes confused. And then you obviously have the incredible operation that the U.S. military executed in Venezuela. I mean, I've been studying this stuff for as a Latin American for quite some time. I didn't even know the Americans could do that, what they did in that one night, in the way that they did it, no casualty. I mean, it just so happened it was, near a miracle. So that appeals to the Latin Americans, the fact that Trump and the White House and the American military can do that. And, there's a lot there that you can sell politically to support your cause, which is what Abelardo de la Espriella in Colombia has done. He has embodied all of that stuff and said, I am going to do exactly what Bukele is doing. I'm going to line up with this macho person that Trump has. I'm going to take advantage of this realism that Rubio is selling to the region. And, to be fair, he didn't won the election by a lot. So Colombia is still divided, right? And that's the problem about the pendulum. Again, these things take time, and they will have to deliver if they want to survive politically. And I will say something more, a last thing that helped me a lot to understand Latin American politics. There's a lot of anti-establishment and anti-traditional political parties in every country. That's everywhere. Panama is going it for the first time in a long time. And that anti-establishment created a phenomenon called political party brand dilution, meaning well-established traditional parties divided and split into 2, 3, 4, 5 different parties that represent different constituents, and that has confused the electoral voters. And that's why a lot of that brand dilution, that political brand dilution, fostered the conditions for demagogues. And things are, it could even sound anti-democratic. People that are, very, very populist, strong man. I mean, Bukele has taken advantage of that. Milei has taken advantage of that. You see the case in Brazil, the same thing. I mean, my own country is going through this very thing right now. And it has happened, over the decades in Latin America in different times. But you need to look at what's going on in Latin America, this political brand dilution phenomena, because I think you'll find a lot of answers there.
So this is what's, I think, it kind of takes us to the conversation around Trump, and you mentioned Venezuela, but the broader sort of effort at deploying the U.S. military across Latin America, focus on transnational crime and the cartels. But it does sound like that Trump has found a real moment of opportunity, of openness to the involvement of much heavier involvement of the U.S. on security matters, given just where the public mood is, where the politics of the region is, the nature of the leaders that are starting to be elected and put in place. And so there clearly is some, he's hitting the right, good timing, and there's some openness to this. From the U.S. side, this is a major controversy, of course, around whether this is a lawful or appropriate use of the military. It's traditionally, from the U.S. perspective, treated as a law enforcement matter. And so we have that sort of debate internally. I'm just curious about how you assess the reaction, the receptivity of the Latin American public and politicians. I'm sure that obviously there's going to be a range of reactions, but to the forcefulness with which Trump is seeking to kind of bring them on board with the use and deployment of the U.S. military on their soil, taking kinetic action against cartels, and just sort of how how much shock therapy is going on with that right now?
I am a lawyer, but I'm not that kind of lawyer, so I won't comment on the legal consequences of those kinetic actions. Merely not because I'm trying to avoid the question, but just because I don't know that law and that kind of legal.
That's for less to figure out. So don't worry
exactly.
about it.
So, but I'll say about this. This is where I will stop citing the giants and my the professors, and this is where I could probably serve and speak to you as practitioner, and given that I was privy and lucky to have been in those rooms. I was Panama's Deputy Secretary of State when President Trump, as president-elect, started that rhetoric of we're taking the Panama Canal back, right? And obviously, immediately everybody thinks about military, right? They're invading again. In the case of Panama, it happens to be true that the U.S. invaded Panama, and let's not get into that rabbit right now. We can talk about it later. So those statements coming from President Trump as president-elect created a lot of problems back home. Put my president and put our administration into a sort of like corner, if you want to look at it that way.
Right.
But the politically, domestically, right, and internationally as well, because friends and allies comment, and then if you have a government that is wary of what Trump will do to their trades and tariffs and whatnot, they start commenting and then put pressure as internationally to a country like Panama, right? So particularly because we're a strategic nation and we're very international, we have the Panama Canal and all that international persona. So the key, though, however, is to understand what Trump is saying beyond those words, and that was what we, or at least in my case, I try to focus on, and I try to advise my president: listen, let's just focus on what the words could mean in terms of foreign policy, rather than the words itself, because Trump's style to say things is very peculiar.
Take Trump seriously, not literally.
Exactly. And then, I can tell you this. So, he was president-elect when he started saying all this stuff. And everybody's like, okay, oh my God, they're going to invade us. And we're going to lose the canal. But at the heart of the question of President Trump's, at the heart of what President Trump was saying, there are a number of things that we, and I think I'm speaking for myself, we need to take responsibility, and as a country, as our own foreign policy. And it is the fact that way before Trump was elected this time, we in Panama, not this government in Panama, made the decision of inviting, rightfully so, a foreign power, which is China, to do business and to engage with us in a manner that government in the past and that Panamanian government wasn't ready, or didn't, in my view, do the due diligence and created the system, the institutions, and the transparency to do a number of things to absorb a power who's actually engaging geopolitically, adversarially to the United States, which is our ally, which is our friend, which is, I don't call I remember telling my president, like, hey, you can go out and say that the United States is our backyard. You don't have to take that the U.S. is saying that just tell that the U.S. is our backyard. That's Panama's backyard, and then just go out and say that, and because in the end it's just work. So what's important here is that we get the China question correctly, and it's something that my president and my client and me as and my foreign minister, we understood that, and we were doing that anyway. Before, again, President Molino started his administration before even Trump got elected into office. And we started that process of decoupling. You want to call it decoupling, de-risking, whatever put your PhD level word in there. But we started that process ourselves way before Trump was president. And all it took was to express that to our friends in the White House, and to express that to our friends at the State Department, like Secretary Rubio, to express that to Secretary Hexet when he went down there, and just to start that process by which we are both fixing our own problems with China. And, if the Chinese have nothing to hide, don't hide it. Let's just engage in that, right? Like that was my strategy to deal with the PRC and their ambassadors and their officials. And eventually, when it comes down to the military stuff, I remember, Secretary Hexed went down there in April last year, and then it was like the whole conversation was about taking the Panama Canal back. And Secretary Hexed said, no, we don't want to take the Panama Canal back from the Panamanians. Let's come up with this phrase: take the Panama Canal back from malign Chinese influence. And that gave you a little cover for the people that want to comment and all that stuff. So when it comes down to the real diplomacy, there is room to do it, even in Trump's era and in Trump's world. That's my contribution, and that's what I think Panama had to do. In the end, when you want to talk about the ports, and there's questions about that and the Chinese ports and whatnot, I think Panama found that answer on its own. It is our Supreme Court. It was Panamanian law. It was our own audits. It was all the use and the practice of our own sovereignty who gave us the right answer on China. And it just so happens that is the same answer that President Trump wanted and that U.S. foreign policy wants and needed. And to be quite honest, and I double dare Democrats and the Democrat establishment, foreign policy establishment, to disagree with that's the answer that they wanted. They want the same answer that Trump wanted on the question of China that we got. We got that answer ourselves and doing the millennium. I mean, obviously, there's a lot there still and a lot of work to be done, but I think that's that is the best way I could put it. And just to wrap it up and just to finish, Secretary Hexed is flying to Panama again next week. A whole year has passed, and he's going there to celebrate military drills and exercises that Panama is participating as a co-equal of the U.S. Navy, and other nations are doing the same. Why? Because we all want to defend the canal. That was always true even before Trump arrived. Are we doing it to flex muscles to show China that, this is our hemisphere and the Donroe Doctrine is still well and much alive? Again, the way I see it is, it is a hegemon reminding itself that it's a hegemon, but that doesn't mean that we in Latin America, we in Panama, cannot have the 2 cents of that's what we want too, right? And we want it because of Panamanian interests aligned with American interests. So that's kind of like what I could say about that.
Carlos, let me ask you. There's so many things to talk about here. This is so great. Thank you for doing this. Let me ask you about Venezuela. I know you've got a ton of experience dealing with the Maduro regime, some of the consequences of their decision making. Trump and Rubio, of course, famously removed Maduro from power. They're going to put him on trial in New York. They replaced him with Delcy Rodriguez, who was his vice president, rather than what a lot of people thought was going to happen by bringing in immediately Maria Corina Machado. I'm wondering your thoughts on that particular aspect of it. How is that seen in the region? Does that lend credibility to what the Trump administration is doing? Domestically in Washington, it seems like there's folks who are critical of Trump for leaving Delcy Rodriguez in place. But is there another side to that coin? And again, I apologize for this really softball telegraphed questions, but what are your thoughts on that?
No, I mean, it requires someone willing to speak live and on the record. That's what it all requires. I would say that everyone that says that it's very critical of the idea of leaving Delcy there, they do not understand the grand strategy is hard, and these things are very difficult. And it's very easy to just blame it and just say that it don't work, and then actually do the actual intellectual exercise of understanding. I think the fact that Delcy stayed responds to the decision to keep the regime, decapitate the regime. You use that coercion balancing hard power, that, Trump and Rubio and Hexed and American foreign policy in this White House took that step and they removed the dictator, but they left the regime. Okay, bear for a second. Theory tells you, and I think it was again to Brzezinski, there is a trap into this whole idea of going into your periphery, and I'm thinking about Cold War terms here, going into the periphery and just do it as hard as you can and just get bogged down on that conflict and just to fix it. And that's a trap, and that's a fallacy, and that could be a problem. And I think leaving Delcy there and leaving that regime there the way it has, it's actually the Trump administration understanding that we can mess with the periphery, but if we actually get bogged down in these conflicts, we're going to lose the global fight. And I think that that's what's behind that foreign policy thinking. Now, we in Latin America, we don't have, we can protest, okay, because you at the expense of democracy and our neighbors and the cry of Venezuelans to get democracy. Now you're justifying leaving this bad regime in place. That's fair. It's fair. But, my question there is, did the Venezuelans themselves were able to get Maduro out? No. I'm sorry. It's a heavy. I say this with a heavy heart, but we didn't. The Venezuelans, we the Latin Americans, if we want to think of all of us of the same color and the same brotherhood of religion or whatever culture or music, whatever it is, Carlos Vives, Enrique Iglesias, we didn't fix that problem. So okay, well, now we have to be patient, I guess, and we have to do the hard work of doing what we can to foster democracy when the Venezuelans actually decide and do it, actually do it, right? And that's a very hard question. And I would say this, not to defend the words of President Trump and Secretary Rubio and all of them, but I think they've been very clear that they do not oppose elections, that they do not oppose democracy, and they do not oppose Maria Corina Machado, and they do not oppose the Venezuelans choosing for themselves. What they do tacitly are against is absolute chaos by destroying everything over, and just imposing the president themselves and getting into that trap. And we will have to find those answers. I don't know if it's going to happen in 6 months. I don't know if it's going to happen in a year. What makes this whole thing even more complicated is the oil and the money and the deals and the lobbyists and the strategists and the consultants who are near the Trump family and near the White House doing deals to kind of like, at the same time, I would remind everybody that that's how always has worked in Venezuela. Or in Latin America. It's easy to dismiss the entire system if you do not have any solutions. So it's going to be hard work, and not everything's going to go the way we want at the first try.
So Carlos, your what you're describing sounds a lot like what Trump's national security strategy talks about, where it talks about tolerable stability in the region. So that is not a overly ambitious objective, right? That is a very real, or they probably see it as a very realist strategy, and I guess a tolerable outcome in Venezuela. But one of the things it says there, I wanted to get your thoughts, is that American policy should focus on enlisting regional champions that can help bring about that tolerable security. Who do you think are the regional champions that have like influence across the region that are aligned with these objectives of the Trump administration on dealing with cartels, bringing about more stability that stems the flow of migration, all these that'll start to allow for more real economic development. Paint the picture of the region for us? Who are the players that are that have like influence over outcomes, whether it's politically or economically across the region?
I mean, this is the softball question, and I have to say, like, this is where I'm gonna do my commercial of like it. I have to say it. It is Panama. Indisputable. Indisputable. It has to be Panama. Why? And I'll tell you why. Because Panama, our experience with President Trump and this foreign policy and this national security strategy and national defense strategy, which I think both of them speak to the same problems and the same issues. Panama is the country that was able to do sovereignty conversation, keep sovereignty. There's no American, even though in Panama also has the story of having the American flag on our soil for 100 years. You guys gave us the canal back, gave us the canal in 1999, and it's been Panamanian, and it stays Panamanian, and it is Panamanian, and it will remain Panamanian. So Panama was able to go through this entire conversation, whether it's military, kinetic attacks, whatever it is that you want, soft power, whatever it is, and we remain intact in terms of sovereignty. Why? Because we didn't fall into the trap. My president didn't fall into the trap of sovereignty. It's not something that you have to go out and say all the time that you're sovereign. It's something that you execute every single day. There is no American flag on Panamanian soil or near the canal. It's just so we were able to do through this entire fallacy. If you think about that,
you think that sorry to interrupt, but you think that question of sovereignty, that ability for the nations of Latin America, as they tangle with the Trump administration, as they work with them on shared objectives on the security front or otherwise, there is a lot of alignment, but they do have this overriding political challenge of how do we do this while we maintain our sovereignty, while we can demonstrate that to the people that elect us that we're maintaining our sovereignty.
You steal that playbook from I don't want to say Trump, but there are other politicians like Trump that's done this in the past. The story, the narrative of anti-American and anti-imperialism and nationalism in Latin America is associated with the left in Latin America, right? So what you do is, in terms of sovereignty, is like you say precisely, we're not losing sovereignty. Working with the Americans is not losing sovereignty. I don't have to become a radical nationalist to prove to everyone that I keep my sovereignty. I'm just going to execute it. In the case of Panama, we execute our sovereignty how? Take about the example of the ports, the Chinese ports, right? The Panamanian Supreme Court, not because Trump told them, not because President Mulino, the executive branch of Panama, told them, they just went through a very transparent audit. They proved that there were deficiencies there that had been there for 20, 25 years. This company has been shorting Panamanians yearly, and this is this is no secret. This has been happening for years and years and years. Nobody did anything. It just so happens that the decision of the Supreme Court of Panama aligns with the overall geopolitical agenda that Trump wants to sell. But going back to sovereignty on the left and the right, my solution, the antidote to this stuff, is to just go out and say, working with the White House and working with the United States doesn't mean they have to surrender nothing and sovereignty. Nobody. Despite the way President Trump talks, he's speaking to his own audience. For whatever reason, domestic reason, he has to. I mean, but he has no say what happens in Guatemala or what happens in Panama, and I think he doesn't want to either. I don't think so. I know so. Why? Because he was saying that he wanted to take the Panama Canal back, and I saw Secretary Rubio and I saw Secretary Hexet face to face, and that was not the conversation that we've had. We had a very cordial, professional foreign policy discussion We don't agree on everything. Of course, we don't. That's never been the case in the history of the world. But we were able to manage those relationships. So I think the antidote is to just go out and say the sovereignty. So going back to your question, it is Panama. Why? Because of the sovereignty question. So we show the region that you can have a conversation with the most, I don't know, insert your adjective for a White House, the most radical White House out there, and you can still have a conversation on preserving your sovereignty. You can just focus on the issues that matter than to be defending your sovereignty. And that's been true for Panama. The other thing, talk about migration. When President Mulino and we took office, there were 1,000 migrants crossing the Colombian and Panama border a day. Every single day. When I was Deputy Secretary of State day one, illegally, 1,000 migrants, 90% of them Venezuelan citizens, were crossing the most treacherous jungle into Panama. And those bunch were committing human rights violations in the middle of the woods to their own, to the groups. They were violating laws. They were, you name it, because it's a jungle that we, the Panamanians, we don't have the resources to kind of control. So, that was happening when we arrived. And President Mulino, through hard work on our own and a good bilateral relationship and good mechanisms with the U.S., both the Biden administration and now with the Trump administration, that triangulation of efforts was able to reduce that number to zero. So we were able to prove to the region that if you work with the U.S. On international illegal migration, you can get outcomes that will serve policy. Yes, there are conversations about the style and, whether deporting migrants to a third world country, it's anti-American. But the job the job of the president of Panama and the former deputy secretary of Panama was not to decide whether working bilaterally is anti-American or not. Working with the U.S. on international migration for the problem that we in Panama had was essential. Why? Because all of those migrants were not coming to Panama to stay in Panama. They were going to the United States. So finding ways to work with our allies and partners is in no way to surrender your moral, your views, because every migrant we took, we treated pair our own commitments with international organizations, international treaties, and a number of agreements that we are not going to neglect for the U.S., for Trump, for anybody. So the way we handle our affairs with migrants in Panama was always within our international standards. So in migration, we did that as well, and I can go down the list on issues that Panama has. There are other examples. I mean, El Salvador, for sure. It's one of those governments and countries. Milei has still a lot of work to do because of the way he handled finances, and he took money from the American taxpayer to balance inflation and do a number of things that he has to do. So a lot, and he has reduced inflation, and he has produced results. And a lot of that has to do with money he took from the American taxpayers. But a lot has to do with the way he has handled his own internal affairs. And that's another story. But I mean.
Yeah. Well, we're going to have to wrap soon, but we can't let you go without touching on Cuba. Clearly, the Trump administration is attempting to tighten the noose to try to get a change of outlook and outcomes from the government there. How do you see what's going on there? I think this is a little more of a. I mean, we had some build up to the final showdown with Maduro. So, but now having seen that, seeing the Team Trump execute something like that once, there's a lot the air is thick with kind of anticipation for what might be coming with Cuba, or just generally the policy that
Yeah.
the administration has taken to really increase economic pressure on the government there, which of course is having an impact on the people of Cuba there as well. So curious for your take on how the region is seeing that play out, how they're reacting to it, and kind of what you anticipate, if you can try to predict the future for us a little.
Yeah, I would start by saying Cuba. You need to start thinking about Cuba. Cuba is a very romantic issue for us Latin Americans and for people here in the United States, in foreign policy particularly, because of the connection with the Cold War, and for decades, and it's impossible to think of Cuba as a very romantic way to do foreign policy. In a way, it's completely different than Venezuela. The Venezuelan problem is old, but it's not 70, 80 years old, right? And it's not as nearly as big for American politics either, like Cuba is. The other thing I would have to say is, obviously, your Secretary of State is Cuban descent, and he comes from the community in a U.S. state in Florida that has become emblematic, right? So that is huge, right? So you have to look everything through those two lenses. What I'd say about Cuba doesn't have oil. Cuba doesn't have plenty of resources that this realistic national security strategy and national defense strategy. And Cuba is not able, if it gets influenced by China or foes like Iran and Russia, the Cuba of today, obviously that changed over the decades because of, Cold War tactics and a lot, containment and stuff like that. But Cuba doesn't have the potential to become that big of a problem, in my view, for the United States and for the Trump administration, right? Which kind of like tells you why Trump hasn't come in the middle of the night and kind of kidnapped that dictator there, right? Can they do it? Absolutely. And I don't buy the fact that Cubans are more ready than the Venezuelans are to push back a military intervention. I mean, I don't buy it. Venezuela has had Maduro had trillions of billions and hundreds of billions of dollars of more than Cuba to prepare his military forces to push back on America, and that lasted a couple hours in the middle of the night. So yeah, in my view, the Bay of Pigs of Kennedy it's not going to repeat if Trump decides to do that. I mean, I'm not suggesting that they should do that. I'm just saying that I don't buy that. That's why they haven't. It's because Cuba doesn't have resources like Venezuela has, and Cuba doesn't have the potential to become that big of a headache in terms of migration, in terms of internet transnational crime, talking about hacking and tech stuff, infiltrating banking secrets, and I don't think that Cuba represents that. I do believe on that the Trump's policy in Cuba has created a lot of suffering for the Cuban people in terms of, because Cuba is not Venezuela, it's not Nicaragua. These people have had, they're poor, like they're communist level poor. They're like post-Soviet, like Soviet Union poor. They're like Mao China poor level, right? So not having energy and fuel to kind of like do a few things, it's actually pretty bad. At the same time, there's a powerful argument of like, that's not Trump's fault. It is the Cuban regime, right? It is the dictatorship who has to take responsibility of this. For us in Latin America, like I said, that's why I use the word romantic. We love Cuba. Cuba is a source of poetry and philosophy for music and friendship and a number of things. I won't throw medicine there or like those, like that. Why? I tell you why. Because behind that argument what it is this very Soviet way to say, it's like, you know, this, you know, the Cuban healthcare system is very good. It's like, okay, yeah, you talk about the communist Soviet model. That's what you're trying to, you know, yourself. Like, that's not a good thing. That's not good for the Cuban people either. So I don't buy that argument either. So I would say, in terms of looking at the future, that is a more complex question than it is Venezuela, for the very reason that, you know, there's not a lot there to gain from a military national defense strategy, national security priority. I don't think China's eyeballing Cuba as a place to go do what they do. So I mean, we just, again, it's whether if Cuba doesn't get fixed and there's no outcome, I think Secretary Rubio has a lot more to lose politically than President Trump, because he has built his career and doing this, and he does have an opportunity to do a lot. We have to look and to see if the region, if Rubio and Trump can gather momentum in the region to see the Cuba issue like they see the Cuba issue, and that's a little bit more difficult, because it's not that clear that a victory in Cuba can be achieved that quickly, and you know, a tactical victory like in Venezuela, because Venezuela is still not a victory.
Yeah. Carlos, well, this has been outstanding. Thank you very much for joining us. We lost Lester Munson along the way to Wi-Fi issues. For any of you watching on YouTube, you will have seen his robot face and maybe heard a little robot voice as we chatted. But thanks again, Carlos. That was excellent. That's a wrap for us, folks. Thanks to Hannah Haynes, Claude Jennings, and the NSI staff for their help in producing today's episode. Join us on Friday, August 14th, for another episode of Fault Lines, the National Security Institute's podcast that gets you smart, fast on the national security and foreign policy debates shaking up America. We're on YouTube, so check out our channel for a video of today's episode. Maybe you'll see less there next time. If you like what you heard or saw, be sure to rate, review, and subscribe.